Chapter 4. Strahd von Zarovich. It began as a normal flying dream. Henry had one of those at least once a week. On mighty wings he soared over snow-capped peaks and pine-covered slopes. A roiling mist cloaked the valley far below. He glided downward toward a complex of old stone buildings perched on the mountainside. When Henry landed in the courtyard, he heard a bell ringing from the tower on one side of the complex. On the other side, there was an eruption of irreverent howling, squawking, jabbering, and shrieking. They all seemed to be saying, "Food! Food! Food! Food!" Henry heard a deep voice issuing from his throat. But it was not his own. "I'm coming," said the voice. "Daddy is getting your food ready." Then Henry reached down to ladle a mess of putrid slop into a dirty bucket. He unlocked a heavy wooden door with a key from his belt and walked down a dark corridor. The discordant cries for food grew louder and louder. Then he saw them. Mutants, dozens of horrid mutants with grotesque bodies. One had the face of a dog, while another had claws like a crab, and yet another had a human foot sprouting from the middle of its chest. "Henry?" Henry bolted upright in a cold sweat. "Henry, are you all right? You slept in." Irina stood beside him. "Ismark sent me up here to get you. Everyone else is ready downstairs." "I just had a nightmare." "We all have those sometimes," Irina said. "I never have." "Really?" "Really." Henry got to his feet. "Maybe it was that blueberry pie I ate before bed. It made me feel strange, kind of dizzy." "Oh, no. Did you get it from an old lady on the street?" Henry gave her a sheepish look. "I wouldn't eat any more of those. People who eat those pies get addicted. So much so that they fall into poverty, to the point of selling their own children into slavery." Henry's face went from sheepish to disgusted. "Do me a favor. Don't tell Navara or Rowan." Henry and Irina came downstairs to find the others in the parlor room. Kolyan Indirovich lay in a simple wooden coffin, surrounded by wilting flowers and a faint odor of decay. "We need to take him to the church," said Ismark, standing over the body. "Hopefully Father Donovich will be ready." Irina put a hand on her brother. "I'd like to say a few words before we take him. I don't think we should linger at the graveyard." Then she bowed her head and prayed aloud. Tears trailed down her face as she spoke loving words in memory of her father. She concluded by saying with a sniffle, "Morning, Lord, take care of my father's soul, and watch over Ismark when I'm gone." "Irina," said Ismark, "we will come back to you as soon as we bury him." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm coming with you." "Irina, we've talked about this. It will be too risky for you to go to the church. Strahd knows we need to bury our father. He might have people waiting for you." "I'll take that risk. I want to be there to see father put to rest." "Irina—" "No, Ismark. I've made my decision." "I could turn her invisible," Navara said. "Watch." The warlock touched Irina on the shoulder, and she disappeared. Ismark's face balked with surprise. "Irina?" "I'm here," she said, touching her brother with an invisible hand. "This just might work," he said. They hitched Snowflake to an old wagon, and once they had loaded up the coffin, set off for the church. Henry, wearing full plate armor, led his horse by the bridle, while Rowan scouted the street ahead. Ismark and Navarra walked behind the wagon, and Irina followed with a hand on her brother's shoulder to reassure him she was still there. Like the previous day, the streets were silent and choked with fog. On the north side of town, against the roots of the cliffside under Castle Ravenloft, stood the drooping edifice of an old stone church. It had clearly seen better days. They had just parked the wagon in the churchyard and started unloading the coffin when they heard the approaching sound of iron-shod hooves and wheels on cobblestones. Emerging from the mist came 4 black horses pulling a black carriage. The horses halted in front of the church. Their nostrils flared. The carriage door opened, and out stepped a petite woman in a golden gown. A skull mask covered her face, but it did not hide the malevolent glow of her crimson eyes. She walked to the front of the carriage with dainty steps and waited. Next, a dark-skinned woman clad in a white dress stepped out. Then a handsome flaxen-haired man in a purple suit. A 4th figure, a woman in red, emerged from the coffin-like carriage. The red-gowned woman held out her hand to yet a 5th person inside. A pale hand with sharp black nails took it. The hand was followed by polished boots that stepped down from the carriage, crunching the gravel road. The hand and the boots belonged to a tall, well-built man with defined cheekbones and a strong jaw. Though his modest waistcoat and riding breeches betokened a man of practical concerns, the furs on his shoulders and the ruby medallion around his neck matched his regal bearing. The dark folds of his cloak brushed the ground as he turned to face them with smoldering red eyes. A whispering breeze stirred his long black hair. Ismark the Lesser, newly appointed burgomaster, and my future brother-in-law. You must introduce me to your friends. The man's smooth and masculine voice spoke with a sophisticated cadence. Strahd, Ismark said. Listen, we don't want any trouble. Why should there be any trouble? You did not think I would miss your father's funeral, did you? Now tell me, who are these friends of yours? Strahd approached Rowan, stopping just inches from her face. What is your name, elf? You, Rowan said. You're the Black Wolf. Yes, I thought you smelled familiar. He leaned in to sniff her neck. I told you we would meet again. Rowan stepped back. What are you? I am the Ancient. I am the land. I am Count Strahd von Zarovich. He bowed. And who is this lovely creature? He swaggered over to Navarra. You are my type. He reached out to touch her red hair. Navarra drew back and hunched awkwardly. No, I'm no one's type. I have a terrible crick in my back that gives me awful posture. My left eye droops in an odd way. So you see, I'm rather disfigured. But at that moment she did see the similarities between herself and Irina, from their slender figures and feminine features to their vivid shades of red hair. She rumpled her face into a frown. I also have this nasty twitch. A comedian as well as a beauty, Strahd said, amused. But do not worry, Irina. You are still my favorite. He turned and looked at Irina. An invisibility spell. Someone has tried to conceal you from me. Tisk tisk. Your loveliness should never be hidden. He waved his hand over her. Navarra felt the illusion break, and Irina became visible. Kiss me, my love, Strahd said. Navara's frown, which had never left her lips, deepened in revulsion as Irina smiled and kissed the vampire. Then Irina took Strahd's arm and told the others, "It's all right, everyone. Strahd is only here to help." "You've charmed her again, you bastard!" "Calm yourself, Ismark," Strahd said, narrowing his eyes at the young burgomaster. Just then, Ismark's knitted brow softened, and his clenched fists relaxed. "You're right, my lord. Forgive me. I should have known you would come to pay your respects." "Are you just going to charm everyone?" Henry asked. Strahd turned his attention to Henry, and his nose wrinkled as if he had caught a bad smell. He walked up to the knight, Irina still hanging on his arm. "You remind me of someone." Then his eyes grew wide and his voice tightened. "Let me see that sword. I promise I will give it back. I am a man of my word. Right, Irina?" Irina nodded. Not wanting to make a scene, Henry decided he should be as obliging as possible. He slowly drew his weapon from its sheath and offered it to the vampire. Strahd wrapped his fingers around the hilt and lifted it up. "Fine craftsmanship. An emblem of the Morning Lord," he said, brushing his thumb over the symbol of a sunburst with 8 rays. Then he thumbed the edge of the blade and smiled. "Just as I thought. A fake." A fake? Henry thought to himself. What did that mean? Strahd handed the sword back to him. "What is your name, boy?" "Henry." "Henry." Strahd said the name slowly, letting it slide off his tongue. "What are your friends' names, Henry?" "Rowan and Navara." "Henry, Rowan, Navara. Meet my consorts. This is Valenta." He pointed to the woman with the skull mask. "Ludmilla," the woman in white. "And Anastasia," the woman in red. He kissed the last woman's hand. "And this is Escher." He gestured to the man in purple. All 4 of them had red eyes. They were vampire spawn. Seeing that everyone was now looking at Escher, Strahd's visage narrowed unpleasantly. "He is a pretty man, but do not get any ideas, ladies." With a firm tug, Strahd pulled Escher's trousers down to his knees for all to see. "He is a eunuch." The man hung his head in shame, but did not protest. Strahd chuckled. "Come now, Escher. Do not look so embarrassed. You would drop your pants for anyone if I let you." The humiliated man pulled his trousers back up, not meeting anyone's gaze. "Now that we have all become acquainted, we should ask Father Donovich to help us dig a grave." "Oh, Father Donovich!" called Strahd at the door of the church. There was a rustling from behind the front door. Then a defiant shout came from within. "I'll never let you in, you devil! Nor will I leave this sanctuary while you and your monsters profane my churchyard." "You can cower behind your crumbling walls and kiss your prayer beads, but tell your son to come out and help us. I have a job for him." "You wicked, evil wretch! You know what you did to my poor son." "He needed to be punished. What a pity that he never learned discipline from his own father." Irina, still holding Strahd's arm, turned to Henry. "Doru, the father's son, took part in a rebellion against Strahd a year ago." "You didn't punish him," the priest shouted. "You damned him, and I will never let him come out to you." Strahd lifted his chin and looked around at his audience. Then he fixed his red eyes on the church and raised his hands into the air. The ground began to shake. There was a muffled sound of scratching and squeaking coming from inside the church. Then a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. The squeaking and scratching grew louder until the doors of the church burst open, and a swarm of hideous rats in their hundreds spilled from within. More and more rats poured from the building in a black torrent that covered the ground. Once the rats had scurried away, and the squeaking grew distant, the shape of a young man appeared in the church doorway. Blood dripped from his mouth, and in his arms he cradled the lifeless body of a middle-aged man, with bite marks on his neck. "No!" the young man cried, collapsing to his knees. "No! Why did you make me do it?" His words petered out into miserable sobbing. "Because, Doru, your father did not take care to feed you properly." Strahd looked at the young man. The broken ropes around Doru's wrists appeared to have been gnawed by rodents. "Your father had you bound and locked in the undercroft like an animal. But I have freed you now." "But I killed him," said the young man, with snot and spittle running down his anguished face. "Doru, you really brought this tragedy upon yourself. Come now, I want you to dig a grave for the late burgomaster. I will even allow you to bury your father." Doru stood, still cradling the body in his arms. Then he trudged out of sight to the graveyard behind the church, groaning and whimpering with every step. "Why are you doing this?" Rowan asked. Her voice strained. "Whatever do you mean?" said Strahd. "I told you I would help, and I am." "And we appreciate it, my lord," Ismark said. Rowan was about to rebuke the vampire's cruelty, but suddenly she felt that his actions were entirely sensible. Her countenance changed. "You're right, Ismark. I'm sure Strahd has his reasons." "Now then," Strahd said, "to the graveyard." Strahd's entourage followed him to the small plot of land behind the dilapidated church. Tightly packed gravestones rose from the fog-covered ground. Doru had dropped his father somewhere in the mist, and was digging up dirt with his shovel, sniffling as he worked. Strahd leaned into Irina, his fingers playing along the neckline of her dress. "I hope you're looking forward to our wedding day, Irina. Once you say yes, we can send out the invitations." "But you look so sad. I hope Doru's little display did not frighten you, my love." Irina looked confused, but only said, "Poor Father Donovich." "That priest should have raised his son better." Navarra spoke up.
"Irina can't really say yes to your proposal of marriage if she's under your charm. You can't control someone and call it love. Yet, in some twisted way, it seems like you want to be loved."
She shook her head.
"You're trying to make friends in all the wrong way."
Strahd's gaze turned on the elf. "I do not need anyone telling me how to woo Irina." Navarra struggled as a wave of magic washed over her. She tried to focus, tried to push it from her mind, but Strahd's will was too strong. "Well," she said, feeling suddenly more at ease around him,
"I suppose it's none of my business."
No, Henry thought. He was now the only person among them who was not under the magical sway of the vampire.
Before I forget,"
Navarra said.
"Since you are the Lord of Barovia, maybe you could tell me. Do you know where I can find Keithlen of the Crooked Teeth?"
Strahd's brow turned up in surprise. "I have not heard her called by that name in centuries." You are a curious one, Navara. But yes, I know her. She goes by the name of Mother Night. She is often worshipped as a goddess in Barovia, and they say that she hears you any time you speak her name.
The Morning Lord is the true god,
Irina said, tightening her grip on the vampire's arm.
His light will save us.
Do not indulge yourself with such superstition, Strahd said. He abandoned Barovia long ago, and his priests peddle false hope. Father Donovich has only reaped the recompense for his simple-minded devotion to the Morning Lord. Doru finished digging and helped Ismark and Rowan lower the coffin into the ground.
"What about my father's body?"
Doru said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Bury him in the same grave, Strahd said. And do not worry, Irina, he added, seeing her concerned face as she watched Doru roll the priest's corpse into the pit. It crumpled on her father's coffin with limbs twisting at odd angles. We will find someone else to officiate our wedding. Navara was right, Henry said, talking fast, perspiration appearing on his brow. You can't charm someone to like you, not with magic. Enlighten me, Strahd said coldly. A person needs free choice, Henry said. Otherwise, it isn't love. You have knowledge of magic to control everyone here, but you don't know what love is. You wouldn't really be happy if Irina said yes to you right now, because it would be you making her say it. It would really just be you telling yourself that you love yourself. Henry went on rambling in a fit of nervous loquacity, until he felt a surge of magic trying to overwhelm him. He clenched his eyes shut and breathed in through his nose. Saints have mercy, he thought. The feeling passed. Divine magic. Strahd's lip turned up in a sneer. You may think your god is protecting you, but do not confuse protection with safety. Trying to charm me only proves my point, Henry said, eyes flashing open. You desperately want people to like you, but forcing them to do so will only make them hate you in the end. Enough! Strahd murmured an incantation, moving his hands through the air in a precise pattern. Then he thrust a finger toward Henry and commanded, Eat dirt. The force of Strahd's spell hit Henry like a hammer, and he doubled over on his hands and knees. Without any control over his body, Henry bent to the ground like a four-legged beast and began devouring mouthfuls of dirt. Panic gripped his mind, but there was nothing he could do to keep himself from swallowing the soggy earth. Strahd smiled. Please make him stop. Irina pulled on Strahd's arm. Please, Navara also begged him. After watching Henry consume mouthful after mouthful for another minute, he waved his hand. Very well. Henry spat and coughed and heaved, trying to wipe the dirt from his mouth. Ismark, are you done yet? Strahd asked. Ismark had just finished filling in the grave. Yes, my lord, he said, putting his shovel on the ground. Doru looked at Ismark and licked his lips like a restless animal. Doru, you may leave if you cannot restrain yourself, Strahd said. Master, Doru whimpered, please end my torment. Strahd ignored him. Doru put his hands on his head and screamed. Then he ran into the woods. Henry, Strahd said, since you seem to be the religious type, you can say a blessing over the departed. Henry was still bent over, holding his stomach. He peered at Strahd through disheveled hair, then straightened up and went over to the freshly covered grave. He said his usual prayer, the one he gave when people harassed him for a blessing. But the words felt even more hollow, empty. His tongue clung to the roof of his mouth as he spoke. "That is quite enough," said Strahd, cutting Henry's prayer short. "Now, my sweet Irina, I will leave you with your friends. Think on my proposal. Remember, your father already agreed to the terms of our marriage before he passed. I have his signature right here." He pulled out a paper from his waistcoat that looked like a contract. "Your father would be very pleased with our union. Wedding plans have been made, and all that is needed now is for you to accept me, freely, as your loving husband." He kissed her hand. "Oh, and Henry, I dub you the new officiant for our wedding. I'm sure Irina will be happy having you marry us." He turned back to Irina. "Farewell for now. Until next time, my love." He snapped his fingers, and the 4 vampire spawn followed him back to the carriage. Once they were all inside, the horses trotted away until the carriage and its uncanny occupants were swallowed by the mist. As soon as they had disappeared, Henry said, "Let's get out of here. Irina, Ismark, what road should we take to get to Vallaki?" "There's no hurry," Ismark said. "How about you all stay here one more night?" "Yes," agreed Irina. "There's no rush. I would love to stay at home just a little longer." Henry protested vehemently, but the others told him he was being unreasonable. Henry ran his fingers through his hair. He wanted to yell at them, to scream with indignation, but he knew it would do no good. "I do want to go to Vallaki," Irina said, "but it can wait." It was decided they would stay with Ismark one more night and leave the following morning. For the rest of that day, the others seemed mostly themselves, except when Henry would mention Strahd. The sound of that name made them smile fondly. Henry could not convey to them how urgently they needed to leave the village of Barovia. Save for Henry, they were all still charmed. When the others went to bed that night, Henry was the only one who thought they should keep watch. He stayed up late, replaying the events of the day in his mind. He thought of the way Strahd had played everyone, like a master puppeteer. Then he thought of Baron Tostig, ordering him to track down the werewolves. He thought of Duke Randall, ordering him to study at school, ordering him to serve in the army. He thought of the thousands of people chanting at Castle Verdinia, chanting, controlling him. Henry's desire to be the master of his own fate had led him here. How ironic. Now he could not shake the image of the smug grin on the vampire's face as he forced Henry to eat dirt. "What have I gotten myself into?" Henry thought. He fell asleep, slumped by the front door, and dreamt another nightmare for the second time in his life.